Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Le Bourget Air Show, a very warm welcome to our first press conference here. Please welcome with me John Leahy, our Chief Operating Officer Customers, and Bob Lange, SVP Market and Product Strategy. And yes, we have made it. You know, normally we issue our global market forecast in September, and this year we had the plan to go out 3 months earlier at the show. And congratulations to Bob and his team. We have made it, and we are very proud to present the results to you today. And without any further ado, I will pass on straight to John to give you the latest figures.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I think you've all seen that we've already issued a couple press releases. In fact, I believe it's 3 out so far. There'll be another one in about 1 hour announcing some deals. But today and this morning, we're here to talk about the global market forecast and what this industry is going to look like over the next 20 years. So one of the key points is, of course, where we are today. 6.2 trillion revenue passenger kilometers. And for reference, that's about 12 times larger. 12 times larger than 1970 when the 747 was introduced. This industry has really changed over the years. Anyway, it's going to change some more. About every 15 years it doubles in size. So in 20 years it'll be up by about 2.5 times, 150%. Passenger aircraft, counting 100 seats and above jet aircraft, 17,000 flying around the world today. That'll double up to 35,000 going forward. So that requires about 32,000 new passenger aircraft. And then, of course, the freighters are there with new freighters, about 800 over the 20-year period, giving us 32,600 aircraft. I put that little blue box up there, the change from last year. Everybody always wants to know, well, how did it change from last year? It's up by about 1,200 aircraft over the last year's 20-year forecast going forward. Now, if we look at it by category, about 23,000 single-aisle aircraft, up by almost 1,000 aircraft since last year. We've got about 8,000 twins, up by 322 aircraft, 1,500 very large aircraft, about 1,200 and some odd of those are the passenger version of the aircraft. Up by about 50, and that gives us the 32,600 aircraft worth 4.9 trillion. Stefan likes to round, so I think the press release says $5 trillion, but it's technically 4.9 trillion. If we look at this in the different categories, you can see 70% are, of course, in the single-aisle category, but if you add that up, you can see that we're looking at about 55% is in the wide-body category. Now, if you look at GDP, over the years, you can of course see the financial collapse of the 2008, 2009, 2010 time period. If we look at aviation, you can see that we follow GDP. And that's really important when people talk about the world going forward. And we're talking 20 years. We know it's going to be up over 20 years. The question is what happens in shorter time periods. I think one of the key things to do is look at GDP growth. If people are forecasting another dip like you see on the left-hand side of that chart, I absolutely assure you aviation will go down with it. But if we're looking at 3% growth going forward, aviation will remain strong. And one of the reasons for this is the emerging economies of the world. If you go back to about the turn of the millennium, before that, the emerging economies tracked along with the mature economies. Now there's a pretty strong divergence. Yeah, they go up and down in sync, which is something they didn't necessarily do in the past, but they aren't sitting on top of each other. What we're really seeing is much more growth year after year in the emerging markets around the world. And the good news is, of the 7.3 billion people in the world today, basically 6 billion of them a little over 6 billion, are in the emerging markets, where 1 billion are here in Western Europe and North America, Japan, Australia, and places like that. And the growth rate is substantially higher in the emerging markets than it is in the mature markets. And one of the reasons for this is the middle class. And if you look at the middle class going back to 2004, so we're looking about a 10-year period here, you can see in Europe, including the forecast going forward, it stays virtually flat. If you look at North America, which is basically the United States and Canada, it's staying relatively flat. It's also a little bit smaller than Europe because there are quite a few people that are now moving out of the middle class into the lower wealthy or upper classes in the US markets, which also means that they're going to spend a lot of money flying. And then here's the real growth story. It's the movement into the middle class in the emerging markets around the world. So if you go back to 2004, about 28% were in the middle class. If you go up to 2034, about 20 years from now, 55% of the population of the world is going to be in the middle class. And that means you have disposable income. It means you have money to fly. You have money to travel. And there's one thing we've learned since the dawn of the aviation age is that when people have disposable income, they use it to fly. They do it for business, but they really do it for pleasure, for visiting friends and relatives, etc. And if you look at this in terms of what's happening here, 43% of the world private consumption by 2034, think about that, 43% of it will be in these emerging markets. And another way to look at it, I know this sounds complex as a logarithmic chart, but if we look at that left-hand side there, you see India. Well, 0.07 means 1 in 15 people approximately today are flying. And they're flying on the airlines around India. They fly internationally. In the PRC, it's about 1 in 3 people are flying today. In Europe, more than every person takes a trip, 1.2, and in North America, about 1.6. So 25% of the population of the emerging countries took a trip in 2014. But if I move that forward to the end of our 20-year period, very interesting number. Now, India, which remember was 1 in 15, has now moved up to where China is today. It takes them 20 years. If they had more infrastructure, they could do it faster. But India is now where China is today. China is essentially where the US is today, with about every person, and it's 1.3 billion people, probably going to be close to 1.5 billion in 20 years, everyone in the country, on average, is going to take 1 trip a year. Then you see Europe with 2 trips, and North America with 2 trips per capita a year. That's an awful lot of flying around the world. Now, say, well, there'll be recessions, there'll be oil shocks, there'll probably be SARS epidemics, regional wars. Won't that affect aviation? History tends to show that those effects are very temporary. If you look at that chart up there, you can see very easily that this trend line just keeps growing. And even in the worst shock we've had, 9/11, you can see that little flatness there, and then it picked up the growth rate. So we lost a couple years of growth over 9/11, but then I could draw a line through that from where we were in the year 2000, and you would see it would intersect back around 2004, 2005. So the industry went back to that trend line of growth, and we've had 85% growth in the 13 years since 9/11, and that's virtually on track for our 15 years equals doubling of the industry. And it does it come good times or bad. So if we project it going forward, it's very clear that this industry, 15 years from today, when we're standing around at the Paris Air Show, 15 years from now, the industry will be twice as big as it is today. Now that doesn't mean all of the different regions will be twice as big. Some will double in 10 years, some in even less than 10 years. If we look at the regions today, you see Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. Asia Pacific is 29% of all the RPKs in the world, but it has the highest growth rate, close to 6%. So that in 20 years, they will be over 1/3 of the world, 36% of the world. Europe is 25% today. It'll be much bigger because remember it's more than doubled, but it'll be 21% of the world. And North America, very interestingly, 25% of the world traffic today will be down to 17% of the world traffic 20 years from now. And interesting on the Middle East here, because they end up in the news a lot, 9% of the world traffic today will be up to 13% of all the traffic in the world 20 years from now. Now, if you look at this in terms of the individual regions or routes, etc., domestic China is pretty strong. Intra-Western Europe is a little bit stronger than that, but the dominant market would be second from the top, domestic U.S. So you get on an airplane in LaGuardia, you know you're waiting in line, or Reagan Airport for number 12 for takeoff or whatever, and the airplanes are coming and they're going out like clockwork. Well, what's interesting is how this develops over 20 years. Look at the number one market 20 years from now. It's domestic China, not regional, not going across the Pacific, not going to Europe. The number one market in the world is going to be flying from one city to another within China. And then, of course, you have the domestic USA and intra-Western Europe. Very interesting developments going forward. So, if we look at this another way, you can see that airplanes are getting bigger and we're using them more effectively. In terms of the average seats offered per aircraft, it's up by about 50%. Well, that's also meaning that we're using the aircraft because they're more reliable now, a little bit longer per day as well. And load factors, well, we all fly. I think we're well aware of the fact that load factors are getting higher, which, by the way, is very important when you consider sitting there on some of these airplanes flying longer and longer trips. You want that 17-inch seat, or do you want the 18-inch seat? Personally, I can't fit into the 17-inch seat, so I prefer the 18-inch seat. What are we doing for the environment? Not to mention the bottom line for the airlines, we're reducing fuel consumption. If you go back, you can see basically it's around 2003, 2004, about 10 years, we've reduced fuel consumption by about 1/3. That means we've reduced emissions by about 1/3 as well. And if you look at those oil price forecasts, well, one forecast is as good as another. We tend to like this forecast, which is a amalgam of several of the forecasts that we use, plus our in-house forecasters. And you see it stays below $100 a barrel, probably until about 2020, with some perturbations in there. But then it continues its increase back up into the $150 a barrel range over the forecast period. Now, some of you talk about fragmentation of the market. Will there be new routes opening up? Of course there'll be new routes opening up. If we're going to double in size every 15 years, there will be new routes opening up. But 70% of the traffic growth is coming from established routes, from the existing network. Why? Because that's where people want to go. There are 47 aviation megacities around the world. I'm talking about long-haul traffic now. These are flights over 2,000 nautical miles. So that's long-haul traffic. A megacity has more than 10,000 passengers getting on board every day to go more than 2,000 nautical miles. Well, there are 47 of those megacities. There they are on the map. But they carry about 90% of all the traffic. Now, some is from megacity to megacity. Some is just passing through, using the megacity as a hub, going someplace else. But they go either from a megacity to another megacity or to a secondary city, but they pass through those big cities, and they are 22% of world GDP. Now, by 2034, 20 years from now, we'll double in size, about 91 megacities around the world, and that'll be 95% of all the international traffic, and that'll be 35% of the world GDP will be generated through those megacities. That's why the traffic is there. And are these megacities getting congested? You know they are today. There are 47 megacities today, as I just mentioned. 39 of them are already in some form of congestion. Are we going to build another Heathrow? Are we going to build another Charles de Gaulle or another Frankfurt? You know we're not going to do that, but we know traffic's going to double in 15 years. So how are we going to handle that? Well, I think you've come to the right place. You see our A380s parked right outside. In terms of the megacity, what's very interesting is that's where the wealth is. 47 megacities around the world, that's where they are. But what's very interesting is if you take the average wealth GDP per capita in places like the United States, you see that if you live in a megacity, the people are 25% wealthier. There's more GDP generated through a megacity in North America. In Europe, if you live in one of those megacities, your wealth is 60% higher, or GDP is 60% higher per capita than it would be elsewhere. In Latin America, we talk about income distribution, it's 90% higher. But look at Russia, and look at Africa, and look at the Middle East, and look at Asia Pacific. In Russia, it's 300% higher. In Asia Pacific, it's 300% higher. That means if you're living in a megacity, your GDP, or wealth being generated per person, is 3% 4 times greater than it would be if you were living in a rural area. That's why traffic doesn't want to go to rural areas. Aviation wants to connect these wealthy megacities to wealthy megacities around the world. And routes between aviation megacities have more premium passengers, as you would expect. If you're going from a megacity to a megacity, 14% of the traffic is going to be premium traffic. Right-hand side of that chart, if you're going from a secondary city to a secondary city, only about 8% of that traffic is premium traffic. And if I can sum up here before we open it up to questions, everyone always wants to know, well, how many of these airplanes are required for growth? How many for replacement? Well, in our forecast, you start in 2015, right, end of 2014, there are 19,000 aircraft down to about 6,000, 5,900 that you see today. Of those 19,000, almost 6,000 of them will still be around 20 years from now. But then 13,000 are going to be replaced, and then 19,500 are needed for growth, and that gets us up to 32,600 new aircraft required over this period. Summing up then, strong and resilient passenger growth. That's going to be also driven by the fact that oil prices are down. The trend is uncertain, but most probably after some flatness until about 2020, it'll continue its increase. We see a demand for 32,600 new aircraft. 31,800 of them are for PAX and 800 are freighters. By the way, that's going to be worth $4.9 trillion. 13,100 passenger aircraft for replacement. Single aisle is 70% of the units, but about 45% of the actual value, 55% in the wide-body category. And the VLA, the A380, is clearly required. I am honored to see that even our colleagues in Seattle think that there's over 600 required, as we're getting over 90% of that market right now. I thank them for saying that we're going to sell 540 380s over the next 20 years. I appreciate their help. We think we'll sell a little bit more than that. But if you look at the numbers, they know it and we know it. VLAs are required over the next 20 years. We cannot just increase frequency. We have to have more larger aircraft and more efficient aircraft. And that's called an A380. Anyway, let's open it up now to questions. And I've also got Bob Langer here. This is his forecast. His team puts this together. So if you've got a technical question, which means anything I didn't put up here, you ask Bob, okay? And he'll be available for interviews afterwards as well.
Let's start the Q&A session. First question to Sebastian Steike, Flugrevue.
Good morning. I do have a question concerning your single-aisle family. With all this need in China, domestic travel, do you feel like you would like to have an offer bigger than the 321 Neo in the future? Would it be feasible, and would it be something you would be interested in to do something like a A322 Neo or something like that?
No, I think the A321 is a very well-positioned aircraft right now. I've always thought that the 757 was a well-positioned aircraft, except for the fact it burns a lot of fuel. It didn't when it came out about 25 years ago, but now it does. and almost 30 years ago. So you've got the range of a 757. You've got the seat count, perhaps even a bit more than a 757. You've got those wider 18-inch seats, and you've got containerized cargo, but you burn about 30% less fuel. We're very happy with that market sector. If you then look at, well, I need to move it even bigger, I don't want 240 seats, I want 340 seats, we think an excellent aircraft is the A330 Regional. If you notice in the press comments this morning that we have a signed deal now with Saudi Arabian Airlines for 20 A330 Regionals. I think you'll also see orders coming out of China for the 330 Regional as well.
Next question to Stefan via DPA AFX.
Good morning. Concerning the A380 and the very large aircraft, your forecast is about 3 times as high as the one from Boeing. 540
yes,
to 1500.
Yeah,
what makes me yes, what makes you so optimistic? Because they forecast a bigger demand for aircrafts in a total, but less of these big ones. And is it a strategic forecast from you or from them? And will we see A380 orders on this air show and this year?
Well, you'll certainly see them this year. I'm not sure you'll see any at the air show, but you will definitely see them this year. The key thing is, without repeating what I just said, with the mega cities around the world, look at Charles de Gaulle, just right across the road here. We're not going to double traffic in Charles de Gaulle in 15 years by doubling aircraft movements. So if we are going to double traffic in Charles de Gaulle, we are going to need larger aircraft. Remember, an A380 uses a slot in the air traffic control network, and unfortunately so does our A319 CJ or a Boeing BBJ. You move a lot more people in a 380 than you do in a smaller aircraft. So the obvious way to move people, to increase handle this demand for increased revenue passenger kilometers, is to do it with larger and efficient aircraft like the A380. So I'm very comfortable with my forecast. We've been consistent in our forecast for about the last 20 years on the A380, and I think we're getting there.
Next question goes to Tim Robinson.
Hi there. Tim Robinson from Aerospace. What's your take on the air cargo segment? Do you see that recovering? And if you do see it recovering, do you regret putting the A380F on ice?
Well, I've always regretted that we did that, because we had quite a few sold already, and I think would be over 100 380 freighters right now. But having said that, you know, the history, the past is the past. History is history. There's not much we can do about it. I would not recommend today that we bring out an A380 freighter. You can imagine I am looking at the possibility of doing re-engineering or even a minor stretch to the airplane. We're studying that now.
Next question to Karen Walker, Air Transport World.
Hey, John, over here. So following up directly on that. So with your bullish, your optimism for the A380 and that market, is it a case of when, not if, the A380 Neo is launched?
That's a good way of putting it, yeah. I would like to believe that. But you must remember that you were talking to the commercial director here. I don't see the CEO. He's not the CEO yet here. And I don't see the CFO here, so I can't speak for the company, but I know that there is demand for the aircraft. From the charts we put up, of course, there will be continuing demand for the aircraft.
Next question to Andrea Rossmann, Bloomberg.
Yeah, a follow-up question on that as well. There was an interview in the Wirtschaftswoche with Tom Enders last week where he said clearly that they would not do A380 Neo for just one customer. You're out there talking to lots of customers. How many other customers besides Emirates have expressed a strong interest in the Neo?
I'd say that we're talking to at least a half a dozen right now.
And who've expressed a strong interest?
Yes, I don't think we're going to have a half a dozen in the launch phase. If we were to have a launch phase, I think we would start with a small number.
Next question, Robert Wall, Wall Street Journal.
Sorry, just back to the forecast, though, Robert. I mean, you're right, you've been consistent, but their forecast has been a bit more accurate for the last 10 years, at least, on the VLAs.
No, I don't think so. How would you say that?
Yeah, because if you look at where you are on your compared to your forecast in terms of orders. But
Let's-
so let me
we
ask.
don't want to waste everyone's
okay,
time. Let's
let
go
me
back
ask-
and look
okay,
at those numbers.
Let me
as
ask
to
you the
where we
question.
are.
The question I'm asking is, when do you think, if to get to the figure you say, demand will really start picking up? Is it another 5 years? Is it 10 years? When is that knee in the curve?
Well, I think demand is there right now. We're looking at aircraft that are already congesting airspace and major hubs. People want to fly into the major hubs. This whole thing about increasing frequency is getting a little on the silly side. I flew up from Toulouse yesterday, and I was in a nice Airbus airplane flying from Toulouse to Charles de Gaulle, and to Orly. And 25 minutes later, there was another flight doing exactly the same thing. I would humbly suggest that everybody would be better off if those two flights have gotten combined in a bigger aircraft. That is the case ultimately around the world for the A380. If you want to leave Hong Kong and go to London, you want to leave on a day flight or you want to leave on a night flight. You don't want to say, well, why don't I get to the airport at 3 a.m. and arrive at 1:45 a.m. No one wants to do that. So if an airline offers a flight at 3 a.m. out of Hong Kong, very few people are going to show up for it. So it's obvious we need the larger aircraft.
Next question to Jens Flottau, Aviation Week.
Yeah. John, you mentioned the possibility of a slight stretch. Are you suggesting that if you do the NEO, you would automatically stretch the aircraft at the same time, or would that be a step too later?
Well, once again, I don't want to comment on an airplane we haven't launched yet, so why don't you wait for my launch presentation on that, and we'll explain what we're talking about. But we are discussing a little stretch with some of the airlines.
Good. Next question.
Yes, Mr. Lee, if we see the order books today, this Paris show will show us the competition between the A350 and the Dreamliner. And when you see the order books, there are 300 planes difference in the orders. Could you expect to be on the same level and to sell many A350 competing the Dreamliner in the few years?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that the A350 is going to outsell the Dreamliner over a 20-year period. Remember, we started late. We started several years after them. We did our original 350. Then we changed from that and went to the all-new design. The fact is, we looked at everything they had in the airplane, and we decided, well, if we're going to spend our 10+ billion euros, we might as well make it a better airplane. So we made it wider. The seats are bigger. We made it more efficient. We gave it better range. We gave it better maintenance cost. We have a better airplane. So over time, it's obvious we're going to not just catch up with them, we're going to exceed them.
Do you think Emirates will order it?
Well, ask Tim Clark. I'm hopeful that everybody in the world is going to order it.
Is there a next question in the room? If not, I will conclude this press conference. There's one more over here.
Okay.
Hi. You, as usual, are projecting large amounts of growth in aviation. Can you talk about whether that is compatible with potential restrictions in carbon emissions?
Yes, as long as we keep the fuel efficiency up, it is compatible. Notice that chart I had where since about 2004, we've reduced fuel burn by about a third. That means we've reduced emissions by about a third. Yes, and that's the whole thing. We're talking about growth in aviation. So if what you do is put people in little airplanes and fly them back and forth 25 minutes apart, you will not reduce fuel burn per passenger. But if you combine some of those flights, as I'm suggesting we do, into A330 regionals instead of single aisles, into A321s instead of A319s and 737-700s, et cetera, and ultimately moving up to, there it is, the A380 down over there, you can move more people more efficiently with significantly less impact on the environment.
One more question over here.
Thank you. John Collingridge, Sunday Times. Do you think within that 20-year forecast you're going to see a serious competitor to the duopoly that exists among the airframers?
I think by the end of the 20-year period, the Chinese are clearly going to be producing commercial aircraft and selling them around the world. And that's probably going to force me into retirement. But Airbus will be around anyway. I'm not worried for the next 10 years. Okay.
With this, let's conclude the press conference. Thank you for coming. We have more press releases coming
30
out.
minutes. 30 minutes.
Coming out today. And let me also remind you, we have aircraft visits of the beautiful aircraft you see outside, the A380, the A350 by Qatar. The visits are taking place 11 to 12 and 14 to 1500, and you let yourself known at the Airbus pavilion to get this organized for you. Thank you, and see you again at the next press conference.
And Bob is available for anyone who wants to have technical discussion about anything I said, and he's free to disagree with anything I said too.
And there's a free lunch at Airbus, so you are very well invited. There's a free lunch.
Something else today, is I will. Okay, thank you.